There again. The fact, the last time I was in London, which I must say I haven't seen much of London, I'm looking forward to it on this trip, was in 1955, and I was only here for 2 days. And they had a big picture of mine hit the deck.
Yeah.
And
we're going to see a bit of that in a minute. I'm
oh,
glad
really? Are we? Oh,
but
good.
tell me, why have you not made films and for what? Must be 15 years? More than 15 years?
Well, you know, they just don't make many musicals. That's the thing I find so heartbreaking, mainly because they just don't have the economy right now is so bad in the States. I don't know what it's like in Britain, but it's pretty bad over there. They just can't afford to make too many musicals. Now and then Liza Minnelli, you know, she did Cabaret, or Barbra Streisand will do one, but really they just don't make them. It costs so much money. And that's why That's Entertainment, I think, has been such a big, big hit, because this generation today are seeing all these things that we used to take for granted, you know.
You once described yourself, I believe, as the near click of Hollywood. Now, what exactly did you mean by that? Did you feel that...
Near what?
Near click. In other words, suggesting that you hadn't quite made it in Hollywood the way you'd have liked to.
Oh, I see. Well, the reason is, I think, I came after Eleanor Powell. She got to the cake first. It's like Sonia Henney got to the cake first as the world's greatest skater, and Belita or any of the other people that followed. Really, I'm always referred to as Ann Miller, the dancer, and I find it very annoying because I sing, and I have a big voice, and I act, because I've done a lot of films where I played straight parts, and I've been playing straight parts on the stage, but I always get a bit annoyed because people always say, no matter where I am in the world, and mainly because of all my Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer films, oh, there goes Ann Miller, the dancer. And I think, oh, it's been a blessing and a curse, you see.
But as Ann Miller, the dancer, you often had to play second fiddle, as it were, to people like Catherine Grace and Jane Powell, even Esther Williams.
That's true.
That must have been very irksome, wasn't it?
Well, it was, you know, but it took all those years of experience and doing film after film after film to finally to get me on Broadway and in a play by the name of Mame, and I followed, I was about I think the 5th or 6th Mame. But it was the greatest thing I ever did, and certainly my biggest success. And I just wish now that we could find a story that would suit me, and I could go back to Broadway and do something that would really be outstanding. They want me to do Girl Crazy next year, which is a George Gershwin old revival, but I don't really like the story to it.
And did you have any regrets about Hollywood? I mean, would you like to go back there and make another movie, or are you happy that it's...
Oh, no, I think Hollywood's marvelous. It always will be. Right now, Hollywood is all over the world. It's not just in Hollywood anymore. Why that is because I think the whole world became a back lot. They shoot all over the world now, so Hollywood really isn't Hollywood anymore. I mean, it's just a memory. Yeah. It isn't the Hollywood that I once knew, because the glamour and all the things that were so glorious about the tail end of the golden era that I was involved in, it's really all gone.
Yeah, well, you've left us some very pleasant memories, and we're going to see one in just a moment now. Meanwhile, it's nice to have you in London.
Thank you very much.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's programme. We'll be back next Friday with a batch of films on general release, like Wild Party, starring Raquel Welch, Mel Brooks's The 12 Chairs, and That Lucky Touch, which stars Lee J. Cobb. Also a report from Booker Airfield near Oxford, where Malcolm McDowell, Christopher Plummer and Simon Ward are filming Aces High. But until then, let's have another look at Ann Miller in Hit the Deck from That's Entertainment. Good night.
lights went on, and 3 people tried to come in. One with a...
Oh, you mean the lights weren't on while we were doing our little hoop-de-doo?
transmission lights
Oh.
on, so it was very nearly disaster out.
Oh dear.
All right, we
Oh, I wasn't aware of any of that, I'm happy to say.
Well, that's my luck today.
Could you just look at Barry a moment, please?
Surely. Yeah.
Silent or not? I mean, does it matter about talking or not? Just look at Barry and not say anything, please.
Yeah, yes.
We're still recording. Could you put your arm? That's it. Few smiles from you, please, Barry.
Yes, no. Is this that they run the credits, is that it?
Thank you, that's fine.
Now they cut away.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
The others include That Lucky Touch with Roger Moore, Susanna York and Lee J. Cobb, Wild Party, the latest film by the very talented director James Ivory, which arrives accompanied by a note of frustration from its maker, the Mel Brooks comedy The 12 Chairs, featuring Ron Moody, and Black Christmas, a kind of spooky thriller with Olivia Hussey and Keir Dullea. And in addition to all that, we have a location report on the making of a picture called Aces High, the very production of which is at least an indication that once again the British film industry is struggling up, cursing softly from its deathbed. But let's begin with That Lucky Touch, which also has the merit of being largely British. It doesn't have too many other merits, but it does have that one. Roger Moore plays an arms dealer and Susanna York a pacifist newspaper girl who doesn't like arms dealers, and the two of them are thrown together in Brussels, where NATO is in the middle of one of its war games. Lee J. Cobb plays an American general married to Shelley Winters, and we find him now in his office on the eve of those war games.
Now the battle area, here's the battle area, and this is the chateau. It was decided to put the British to the south, together with the Danes and the Italians. And I'm going...
General?
Don't interrupt.
But, sir...
I know. Don't panic. Don't panic. We've got 4 minutes. Yes, Mr. President, this is General Steedman. The hell are you doing on this line?
What's the matter? Did I call the wrong number or something?
Well, as you probably gathered, That Lucky Touch is a comedy. I think it set out to be the kind of comedy that might have been made in the 30s, with perhaps Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. The conflict is provided by the divergent aims of Mr. Moore and Miss York, he wanting to sell arms to anyone who'll buy them, and she wishing to spike this ambition, and indeed to sabotage the war games themselves. It's a film that's full of good intentions and wants very much to be loved, and yet somehow it doesn't come off. Hard to say why, really. After all, Christopher Miles is an able young director, and the cast is full of agreeable and talented people. Besides which, Miss York is very pretty, and so indeed, I suppose, is Mr. Moore, a man I've always found endearing, ever since he claimed in a moment of searching self-analysis that though he might not be as good as Laurence Olivier, he was undeniably taller. But alas, in this instance, a star who's taller than Olivier is not in itself enough. A little more drive, pace and humour in the script would have been equally welcome, which is not to say that the film is devoid of highlights. because, to be sure, it has one or two. Notably a lengthy sequence early on when Miss York has been locked out of her flat and Mr. Moore, her neighbour, comes reluctantly to her rescue. In part, at least, it goes like this.
Mr. Scott, I feel absolutely safe in your hands, because there is something about you that brings out everything that is vicious and violent in my nature.
Mrs. Richardson, we understand each other perfectly. Allow me.
There's a ledge.
Yes, but it's a long drop and it's bound to be slippery in the rain.
But it's 6 inches wide.
I have a large foot.
This is definitely open. I can see the curtains fluttering.
So near and yet so far. Well, maybe we can think of something else.
But you could easily climb along that ledge.
Mrs. Richardson, I am a good neighbor, not an aerial acrobat.
But I'm sure you could do it. It's just a matter of not looking down.
I'm bad at heights. I can see it now. Broken leg, fractured skull, and we'd still be locked out of your apartment, whereas the worst that can happen here is a little crick in the neck from sleeping on the couch.
You were never married. You're too damn self-centered.
From 18 to 22, I was both married and unselfish. 2 of the greatest mistakes of my life.
Well, that lucky touch goes on general release on Sunday. Meanwhile, there's a rumour being put about that The 12 Chairs is Mel Brooks's latest film. Well, it isn't. It was made in 1970, after The Producers, but before either Blazing Saddles or Young Frankenstein, and is a more modest and less ambitious work than any of those. Nevertheless, it's a very funny and highly enjoyable story. It's set in Russia, 10 years after the Revolution, about the search for a dining room chair, one of a set of 12, in which a fortune in jewels is hidden. The protagonists are Ron Moody as an overthrown and consequently impoverished aristocrat, and Frank Langella as a young opportunist and conman with whom he goes into partnership. Their rival in the quest for the chair is a grasping and worldly priest played by Dom DeLuise. Mel Brooks himself crops up as Moody's former servant, giving a performance which, as ever, goes wildly over the top. Well, you could say the same for the film itself, of course. Brooks is not a man who is noted for understatement and restraint, but he is a man who knows about comedy and comic timing, and those are rare gifts these days. But now let's have a look at some of the action. Dom DeLuise, sent off on a false trail by the wily Mr. Langella, ends up in Siberia, confronting Diana Coupland and David Lander.
The chairs belonged to my wife and her mother before her. And now my wife is ill. She's very ill. She's dying, dead, dying. She keeps calling for her chairs. Oh, please, you cannot deny me. It's a dying woman's wish.
Olga, what shall we do? Shall we give him the chairs?
Don't be ridiculous. Nobody's taking my chairs.
You dirty.
I'm sorry, I cannot let you have the chairs.
I didn't hear that. 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 I don't want to hear that. Don't you understand? I don't want to hear that. I don't. That's a hurt. That's a hurt. My dear lady, don't you understand? I need those chairs.
Andre!
Oh, baby.
Stop that, Andre! Out! I want him out of this house immediately!
Well, that's done it. Wait! Wait! Let's discuss this like a dog! Don't judge a book by its cover. A memento of my visit to your lovely home. Ow! 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 Wait! Wait! Okay! 100 rubles! 102!
As you can see, dead subtle stuff. The 12 Chairs shares a double bill with James Ivory's Wild Party, whose advent was heralded by a bitter letter from Mr. Ivory himself, accusing the distributors of botching his work. Well, before we go into that, let me tell you that the film is based on a narrative poem by James Moncure March and concerns a party given in 1929 by Jolly Grimm, a faded silent screen comedian played by James Coco, to launch his first picture in 5 years, the picture he believes will take him straight back to the top. Interwoven with this is the story of Jolly's relationship with his young mistress Queenie, as personified by that walking, talking Playboy centerfold Raquel Welch. Here she is entertaining the guests at the party.
waiting for her long-lost love. Sing, sing, sing for Sally like they required a shove. Oh, sing, sing, sing for Sally. She was waiting for her long, lost love.
Never believe, would you, that Raquel Welch is actually quite a small girl? Well, the party starts off on a note of hope and optimism, but then as Jolly's film, in which he plays a monk called Brother Jasper, lays a predictable egg among the distributors he's invited to see it, the whole affair develops into a drunken orgy and ends in tragedy. Wild Party's a flawed work, and I dare say the director, James Ivory, would claim that this is because it's been drastically cut and reassembled without his approval. When things happen, they happen fast, events tumbling upon one another without much warning or build-up. Even so, it's a good deal more interesting than most of the films now showing around the West End. As he proved with Shakespeare Waller and more recently The Savages, Mr. Ivory is always an interesting director even when the mice have got at his work. So despite the fact that the version showing in London runs for only 85 minutes compared with the 100 minutes that were screened in America, there's still a lot to commend. The atmosphere of the doom-laden celebration is superbly evoked, and the orgy scenes are genuinely erotic without being overly explicit. But now here's the moment when the film showing has ended in disaster, and Jolly, by now drunk, tries desperately to persuade a distributor, played by Eddie Lawrence, that he can still make it better.
What do you say we put Brother Jasper in a bank? He goes to a bank to make a deposit.
1785.
What's the difference? So we make a few allowances. What's the difference? See? So he goes to this bank, and he's got the week's collection, see? And he gets a receipt from the teller.
Handwritten on a piece of old parchment.
What's the difference? So, all of a sudden he sees these two bastards, see? And they're wearing two big black sombreros. And one of them's holding a gun over the crowd, see? And the other one has cleaned out the safe. And the other guy starts taking the valuable from the patrons. Take the valuables, go ahead. Patrons, give me one. Give him what he asked for. He's a mean bastard. Go ahead, give him that side. Now, Brother Jasper can't let this happen, see? Because, I mean, he's responsible for the church's funds. So he sneaks away. Nobody notices him. He's a man of the cloth. Who's going to pay? Let's see. He sneaks up behind the basket. He sneaks up. He's scared, but he goes through with it. All right. Reach for the ceiling. Bang! Brother Jasper falls to the floor. Missed, you bastard. He falls to the floor. He dies. It'll be better when we get a real actor to play. You'll see, the gun keeps firing. See, it's the kick. It's the kick. It's the kick of the gun. The bullet flies. It's leaping. Everybody's dancing. Please, jump. Can. Go on, please. Go on. What the hell is going on here? Dance, you son of a rattlesnake. Dance.
I won't.
Why the hell not?
Because I happen to know you're out of tobacco.
Well, the irony of this, of course, is that making alterations to his film, no, not quite such bizarre alterations as that, is what James Ivory now accuses his distributors of doing. Clearly the film has been cut and altered, presumably to make it more commercial, and that strikes me as pretty cavalier treatment of any director's work. It seems reasonable to assume that there was originally a good deal more bite in the character of Jolly Grim, because the film has clearly been inspired by, though it's not necessarily based on, the story of Fatty Arbuckle, the silent comedian. In 1921, Arbuckle was joint host at a 48-hour orgy which ended in the death of a girl called Virginia Rapp. The comedian was first accused of rape and murder, then was charged with manslaughter, and was finally acquitted after 2 juries had failed to reach a verdict. Fatty Arbuckle may or may not have been as entirely innocent and free from blame as the 3rd jury said he was, but after a career that had involved him in nearly 40 films in a dozen years, the scandal finished him off, and he never appeared in a picture again, though he directed some under the names of William Goodrich and even Will Be Good, which shows that his sense of humour hadn't entirely deserted him. Well, as a reminder of what Fatty Arbuckle was like, here he is in drag in Mardi Gras Mix-Up. Well, Black Christmas is rather an effective thriller in the Psycho mould, well directed by Robert Clark. It's not as good as Psycho, but it's not at all bad for all that. It's set at Christmas time in a college town in Canada with a psychopathic killer on the loose. Much of the action takes place in and around a girls' college, and come to that, in and around Olivia Hussey, who's not only beset by obscene phone calls, but is also pregnant and preoccupied with procuring an abortion. Miss Hussey's boyfriend and the father of her unwanted child-to-be is Keir Dullea, playing a music student whose behaviour grows increasingly suspicious as murder follows obscene phone call and vice versa, with the police, of course, utterly baffled. And it's not really surprising that they're baffled when you consider that they've searched every possible location except the almost deserted girls' college itself, where the killer lurks, babbling psychotically away to himself. Still, as I said, it's well put together by Robert Clark, but I take grave exception to the ending, which I imagine is meant to be chilling, but looks far more like a cop-out. However, here's the second murder, or maybe it's the third. You do rather lose count. The carol singers are at the door, Olivia Hussey is watching them, Margot Kidder is tucked up in bed, and the killer is on the prowl. Stabbed to death by a unicorn, that's a rotten way to go. Well, of all those films on general release, only one, That Lucky Touch, was made in Britain, a reflection of the sickly state in which the local industry has been languishing for some time. Still, things are beginning to look a little healthier. Sir Lou Grade has announced a programme of 10 films a year, rising eventually to 20 films a year. And even though that's hardly got started yet, there are at this moment 12 British pictures being made in the studios or on location. One of those on location is Aces High, an Anglo-French co-production actually, although most of its £1.25 million cost was raised in this country. The producer is Benny Fish, who was involved in the Battle of Britain, well, anyway, the film reconstruction of it, and the director is Jack Gold. The location for Aces High is Booker Airfield in Buckinghamshire, where they've recreated the atmosphere of World War I with the aid of archaic aeroplanes, bombed-out buildings and a totally man-made landscape. On the day we were there, Jack Gold was filming scenes involving young pilots of the Royal Flying Corps.
It's never really easy getting the right people, the right type, the right ability and the right age all in the right place. But I think we've been very lucky. Everybody seems to be absolutely tailor-made for whatever they're doing. Malcolm McDowell, Christopher Plummer, Simon Ward, a young actor called Peter Firth, and another marvellous collection of older actors, Trevor Howard, Ray Milland, John Gielgud, Richard Johnson.
It's a period picture, and it's about the Flying Corps in the First World War. And I suppose the character that I play is a professional flyer, a man who is determined to survive. I don't know whether you know this, but the average lifespan of a pilot in 1917 was, I think, 18 days. And my character, who's the CO of the squadron, he's been out there for at least 18 months, and so he's done better than most.
The squadron leader Gresham comes round, Malcolm McDowell, to give a kind of rallying, get the boys to join up and things. And so there's a kind of hero worship thing. I worshipped Gresham, kind of looked up to him, revered him, and consequently joined up and managed to pull strings and things and get in the same squadron.
It's a lovely man I'm playing, actually, for a change. I'm not so austere or sardonic as I usually get to play on the screen, and I grabbed it with great glee because he's a very warm, generous man who forms a passionate attachment to his younger flyers. He's been in the Air Force longer than they have.
He's a pilot who's suffering from the equivalent of shell shock, or I think what they describe as lack of moral fibre. I mean, he's a good pilot, and he's just gone through it and can do it no longer.
170, take 1A, camera.
Action, Simon.
Oh! Oh!
How was it, Joe?
In a wartime situation like this, it's best not to make friends, especially if you were the CO, because you'd be writing to their mothers the next day saying, awfully sorry, what a decent chap.
Done an enormous amount of research on it, and in fact the attitude of the flyers was extraordinary. They would both be very poetic about the romance of flying, and also quite horrific about the awfulness of what it was to be like in a plane that was under attack or in flames.
Aces High is based on R.C. Sheriff's play Journey's End, written in 1929 and successfully revived in the West End Theatre in 1972, which was when Benny Fish conceived the idea of filming it and transferring the action from the trenches of the First World War to the air.
The basic difference is that Journey's End was set in the trenches and Aces High is set in an airfield. It's about the relationships and responsibilities of all the people involved in a small unit of people who are under enormous stress. In the trenches, of course, in Journey's End, it was a very claustrophobic feeling, with shelling going on all the time, barrages and everything else. In Aces High, I suspect one would think that it would feel freer because we're in aeroplanes and they always look very romantic and almost reverting back to the age of chivalry. But if you imagine that they were in a small cockpit without parachutes, and if anything happened to them, there was no way of escape, that can be considered an even more claustrophobic setting.
I hope that the basics of what the play was about are still there, which is why I think it makes an interesting film and an unusual film, and just that visually it'll be that much more interesting.
I don't like action sequences per se, I mean just for their own sake. I like to think we're relating each of them to the character of the people that we see in them.
They went up and they knew they were going to die, but it didn't matter. They did it for their country, and they were very patriotic, and this amazes me, really. I mean, living in 1975, you know, and seeing what's going on in England.
There seems to be a curiosity about that last of the gentleman wars, the last of the sort of falsely romantic wars that turned into such horror.
Incidentally, Aces High has already been pre-sold to about 60% of the world market, a fairly common practice these days. We'll be seeing it here sometime after Easter next year. And as a matter of interest, Journey's End was first made into a film in 1930 as an Anglo-American co-production. The leading actor was Colin Clive and the director was James Whale, who went on the following year to make the original Frankenstein. And now, by way of total contrast, we move on from Booker Airfield to Welwyn Garden City in Hertfordshire, where next Thursday an enterprising movie buff called Warwick Evans is organising a day of cartoon films at Campus West. The afternoon programme is for children and the evening programme is strictly for adults. A whole section is devoted patriotically to new British animation pictures, and 9 cartoons will be having their premieres. Among them is The Day That Battersea Power Station Flew Away, and here's part of it.
It left the ground quite slowly. Nicky thought it was a joke, but at least the London skyline would now have far less smoke. The morning paper's headlines, "Power station flies." Eyewitness reporter couldn't believe his eyes. The RAF alerted. The army on its guard. To find the flying station, everyone tries hard. The 5th of December was freezing. Nicky's room was cold. The Prime Minister asked the people, please do what you're told. The Americans couldn't help us and turned the other face. The scientists were baffled. An extraordinary case. By the afternoon, the country were burning desks and chairs. The government had to admit they were caught unawares.
Well, this British animation section at Welwyn Garden City will be introduced by Derek Hill, who from time to time presents his own lunchtime animation sessions in and around London. Mr. Hill's is a peripatetic show that wanders around town quite a bit. And one of the films he's showing at the moment is Animation Pie, an American production featuring the work of school children. We'll be showing a little of that in a moment or two, but in the meantime, let me just say that I'll be back next Friday at 11:15 with a roundup of the new movies and a review of the latest biography of Judy Garland. Until then, good night.
Okay, here we go. Lions, yeah, tigers. Check that off there. Alligators. Scoot on there. Now, no making faces. Goodbye. Come on, get on there. Goodbye. That's 5 of those. 2 of those. Yeah, I feel the same about you too. Yeah, let's see, that's, Well, on we go to the north. Well, you first. Everybody settle down now. Here we go. Goodbye, everybody. Off we go. On Major Buzz. Did you bring your Dramamine, Noah? Yeah, I think so. It's in the back pocket. I think the elephant has to go to the bathroom. Tell him to lean over the side.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Good evening, and let me begin by asking you a riddle. What has big white teeth, earns millions of dollars, devours women, and is not Warren Beatty? The answer, of course, is Jaws, and tonight we'll be having a look at the career of Steven Spielberg, the young man who directed that License to Print Money. Furthermore, this week sees the unveiling of Barry Lyndon, the first film by Stanley Kubrick since A Clockwork Orange 4 years ago. I'll be reviewing Barry Lyndon later on in the programme, along with the new Charles Bronson movie, The Street Fighter, and we'll also have a report on the Tehran Film Festival. Charles Bronson first, though, and I suppose as quick a way as any of summing up The Street Fighter is to say that it's a sort of Western set in 1936. It's the time of the Great American Depression, the dole, and illegal bare-knuckle street fights, and Bronson, though knocking on a bit for such a demanding sport, is the toughest street fighter in town, as he proves in his first contest under the management of James Coburn.
Anybody want to bet this man? Anybody? I'll get 2 to 1. 3 to 1. Come on, odds like that do not come around every day. Guess you boys aren't as slow as he is.
Get us 150 in the pot. Hold it. They got another 150 for anybody expects a repeat. What do I hear? Yeah, 20. Got it, I'll take it all. Anybody else? No, crazy. We got 15 more. You bet, man? You're off. Oh, wait a minute. We got another 6. That's all we got. I'll take all of it.
I did my part, pal. He's all yours.
Hey, Pops, you're a little old for this, ain't you?
Well, Cheney, the character played by Bronson, is like the hired gun in a good western, a man with a mysterious and unexplained background. He drifts into town on a freight train, broke but with a kind of down-at-heel dignity about him. Coburn is the small-time gambler and hustler who, with the aid of Strother Martin as a drug-addicted cuts and corner man, promotes fights and side bets for Bronson in an attempt to pick up a small but quick fortune. Apart from a sad little romance between Bronson and Jill Ireland, as a girl as lonely and down on her luck as he is, the dramatic tension in the film centres on the relationship between the fighter and his manager and the traditional showdown, the contest between Bronson and a fighter specially imported by the local big-time gambler to decide who's the fastest knuckle in the West. It is in fact a very simple plot and yet strangely effective, very largely because Bronson's morose, immobile face and customary taciturn style of acting are ideally suited to the role. More than that, though, Walter Hill, who both directed the film and helped to write it, evokes the feeling of the times, or what I imagine to be the feeling of the times, with a great deal of skill. And, of course, the whole background of the film is unusual. The fights take place not in rings, but in factories, warehouses and fields. Very few holds appear to be barred, and those arranging the matches are not always entirely honest. After one of his earliest bouts, Bronson is cheated of his winnings, and later on, with his manager and second in tow, pays an informal visit to the promoter of the fight at his roadhouse.
Now I got the gun.
I guess you do.
Anybody else? What about you?
I don't think you want to use it.
That's one way. You want to see another? Is your place Pettibone?
Well, The Street Fighter is now on in London, and so too is Barry Lyndon, directed by Stanley Kubrick and based on Thackeray's novel of the same name. A new film by Kubrick is a rare event. He's only made 10 in 22 years, but as those 10 include Paths of Glory, Lolita, Dr. Strangelove, 2001 and A Clockwork Orange, a new film by Kubrick is also a notable event. What's exceptional about the man is that he never comes out of the same trap twice. Each film is different in content and even in style from its predecessor. 2001 was a masterly example of science fiction, the notorious but brilliant Clockwork Orange, a study of contemporary violence, and Barry Lyndon is Kubrick's experiment in costume drama. Well, I say experiment, but it's far more than that. It's a quite magnificent achievement, certainly one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. Kubrick, the ultimate perfectionist, shot the picture using a specially fast camera lens, which had been designed for the American space project, so that for the first time that I can remember in the cinema, the interiors actually appear to have been lit by candlelight. Very apt for an 18th century story. In the two clips that we'll be showing in a minute or so, I think you'll notice the extraordinary contrast between the interior and exterior lighting. Still, let's not get bogged down on the technicalities. Barry Lyndon tells of the rise and fall of an Irish adventurer and, let's face it, cad, who becomes a soldier, a deserter, a gambler, a duelist, and eventually the husband of a very rich widow. And that's just the first half of the film. I understand that when Kubrick was asked, with natural anxiety, by his financial backers, Warner Brothers, how long it would take to tell the story, he replied, as long as it takes to tell the story. In the event, it took him 3 hours and 5 minutes, and for me, it's not a moment too long. But at this point, let's pause and look at one of the action scenes. Financial embarrassment has driven the young Barry Lyndon, played by Ryan O'Neill, into fighting for the English against the French in the 7 Years' War. In his first battle, one of his early protectors, Captain Grogan, is mortally wounded.
Barry's first taste of battle was only a skirmish against a small rearguard of Frenchmen who occupied an orchard beside a road down which a few hours later the English main force would wish to pass. Though this encounter is not recorded in any history books, it was memorable enough for those who took part.
The stars of Barry Lyndon are Ryan O'Neill and the exquisite Marisa Berenson as Lady Lyndon. The second half of the film tells of Barry's marriage to her, and not least her fortune, and his ultimate decline. But in a sense, the cast hardly matters because this is very much Kubrick's picture. There is, I think, deliberately a distance between the audience and the characters. You're asked to watch the story of their adventures and misadventures, but not necessarily to identify with them. Well, that's a dangerous approach, but it works. And what also works is the leisurely pace of the film, a pace that matches the pace of the novel and, I dare say, of 18th century life itself. So if you're expecting an all-action swashbuckler, forget it. What Kubrick presents instead is a hard, unromantic and unsentimental look at the life and times of a good-looking but ill-fated opportunist, and a brilliant piece of work it is too. But now let's see one of those interior scenes I mentioned earlier. Barry's deserted from the army, disguised as a British officer, and sought refuge in the home of a German girl, played by Diana Kerner, whose husband is himself away at the wars.
And how long has he been gone?
Sorry, I didn't understand. What?
Wie lange ist er schon weg?
A long time. Since springtime?
Must be hard for you to be alone.
It is. It must be very dangerous for you to be in the war.
I'm an officer and I must do my duty.
You are sometimes lonely.
Sometimes.
What did you say? What's your name?
Lieutenant Fakenham.
No, I mean, what is the name before Fakenham?
Meine Vornamen
Ja,
ist Jonathan.
Jonathan. Would you like to stay with me for a few days or sometimes?
That would be very nice.
What I must tell you about that film is that it not only looks marvellous, it sounds marvellous too, because the background music is superbly chosen. Well, the big Christmas release this year, of course, is Jaws, which, as everyone, including myself, keeps repeating to the point of tedium, has taken more money than any other film ever. As you must know by now, though I'm going to tell you again anyway, it's the story of a killer shark, a great white, which swims up and down in the sea off a Long Island holiday resort, picnicking off the bathers. Roy Scheider plays the local police chief who's torn between closing the beaches, which seems the decent thing to do, though not perhaps if you look at it from the shark's point of view, and playing along with the local business community who want the beaches kept open because they'd rather lose a few holiday makers than a few dollars any day. Robert Shaw is the gnarled old fisherman, and Richard Dreyfuss the young marine scientist who finally joined Scheider in his great shark hunting expedition. OK, so there we have the makings of some fairly gory and blood-chilling stuff. Nevertheless, the British Board of Film Censors has decided, no doubt after much deliberation and head-scratching, to give Jaws an A certificate, which means that a child under 14 can see it unaccompanied by an adult, although parents are warned that it contains scenes which they may prefer their children not to see. And in this case, the board wants the warning to be taken very seriously indeed. So there you are. You have been warned, and don't say I didn't tell you. However, among the many success stories connected with this astonishingly successful film is that of the director, Steven Spielberg.
It's not good. The whole front's moving. By the time we're ready to shoot that way, it's going to be all the way down there. This will be a dome of blue.
Spielberg is only 27, and yet with Jaws he's had the kind of success that many an older and more experienced director would feed his third or certainly his fourth wife to the sharks for. Furthermore, this is only his third feature film. His first, which he made in 1972, after a brief career in television, was Duel, an extraordinarily accomplished work about a travelling salesman on a country route in California who comes into terrifying conflict with the mysterious driver of a huge old petrol tanker.
Well, it was originated from a true incident that took place to the writer, Richard Matheson, who had a momentary encounter with a truck driver that lasted maybe 10 or 15 minutes. That was a truck driver who was trying to race him into a wreck, looming, you know, larger and larger in the rearview mirror in the back window, and forcing him to drive at 80 miles an hour. And when that happened to him, he wrote a short story that was printed in Playboy magazine. Well, I just like to think of it as all the hazards that middle-class man avoids when he goes to work in the morning and comes home at night. And that this film was just a grim awakening to a man who plays it safe, a man who really has nothing dangerous ever happens to him. And this truck represents all the dangers, at least for me, that happen to the middle-class businessman who isn't aware of you know, his own mortality.
Duel, which starred Dennis Weaver, was not a particularly spectacular box office hit, but it brought Steven Spielberg to public attention purely on its own merits. In this country, the distributors thought so little of it that they weren't even going to bother with the West End showing. But the critics, that much-maligned mob, were so impressed by the film and created so much fuss that in the end it did play with modest success in the West End. Well, 2 years after Duel, Spielberg made The Sugarland Express, in which Goldie Hawn and William Atherton play a pair of young fugitives who are chased across Texas by the state police. And a year after The Sugarland Express, another critical hit and reasonable box office success, Steven Spielberg was chosen to direct Jaws.
I've always been afraid of the water, and this isn't really a reason, but I felt that Jaws would help cure me of that fear. If I could be around a 25-foot great white shark, I wouldn't be afraid of going into a lake or into a swimming pool. But actually, when I read the book, I was fascinated by the last 120 pages, which was an amazing set piece, a battle between three men amongst themselves, and in the background, a fish that they know nothing about, a fish that they don't, really can't conceive of until they actually see it come out of the water and suspend 20 feet in the air, and they can tell its girth and its length, and it's 7,500 pounds, and it's a Carcharodon carcharias, which is a species of great white. And I was just fascinated with that phobia people have, that when you're swimming around in the water, you can't see below the water line. In other words, you know what your hands are doing, but you don't know what your legs are up to down there. You don't know what's swimming around them, and that's how this film feeds on your fear. It feeds on the paranoia of not knowing what's below the waistline.
This is a great white, Larry, a big one. And any shark expert in the world will tell you it's a killer. It's a man-eater.
Look, the situation is that apparently a great white shark has staked a claim in the waters off Amity Island. And he is going to continue to feed here as long as there is food in the water.
And there's no limit to what he's going to do. I mean, we've already had 3 incidents. 2 people killed inside of a week, and it's going to happen again. It happened before. The Jersey Beach.
1916, there were
5 people chewed up in the surf.
In 1 week.
Tell them about the swimmers.
A shark is attracted to the exact kind of splashing and activity that occurs whenever human beings go in swimming. You cannot avoid it.
If you open the beaches on the 4th of July, it's like ringing the dinner bell, for Christ's sake.
Look, Mr. Vaughn, I pulled a tooth the size of a shot glass out of the wrecked hull of a boat out there, and it was the tooth of a great white. That's a 20-footer.
25. 3 tons on them.
You're going to need a bigger boat, right?
Gotta get it work.
How do we handle this?
Go, Martin, I need you. He's circling the boat, Martin.
Cooper, hurry it up now, tying on. Hurry it up, he's coming straight for us. Don't screw it up now.
Don't wait for me.
Kill it. Kill it. Now!
Well, as the central character in Jaws is a shark, you'd certainly be correct in supposing that much of the more dramatic stuff takes place below the water. But alas, the film company won't let us show any of those scenes, which I think is pretty mean of them. Still, Peter Benchley, author of the novel on which the film is based and now a millionaire, explains that filming those underwater sequences was not without its difficulties.
They had said they wanted to go get live sharks down there to make it obviously real. And I said to the producer, suppose you don't get a big enough shark. This one's supposed to be 25 feet long. He said, so we'll hire a midget and put him in the cage, make the shark look bigger. And I said, all right, big joke. So they went down there, and lo and behold, they got 3 16-foot great white sharks eating a horse over the side of the boat in Australia. And they weren't 25 feet, so they put out a call for a midget, and they got this guy, qualified diver, he said, and they got him on board the boat, and he looks at these 3 monsters eating this horse, right? And he says, I'm not getting in the water with those things. He said, well, I thought you were a qualified diver. He said, I've never dived in my life. I needed the work. So they put a cage overboard, and they said, you can't get hurt. Nothing's going to happen. Nobody's ever been hurt in one of these cages. He says, all right. They gave him some breathing lessons. And he starts for the cage. Before he can reach the cage, the biggest of the sharks crashes into the cage and gets their cables like this. And he puts his head through the cables, backs off and gets his gills caught in the cables, rips the cage off the boat, takes it to the bottom, and beats it into an unrecognizable shred of aluminum trash, which he just smashes the bars and rends it to pieces.
I think they chose a midget because they didn't want the shark to eat too much between meals. Anyway, there you have it, a rundown on Jaws and the heartwarming story of Steven Spielberg, the boy who made it from riches to even greater riches. Well, I'll be talking more about Jaws next Tuesday because our Christmas edition of Film 75 is on Tuesday and not Friday next week. But now on to A Woman Under the Influence, which is John Cassavetes' study of a lower middle-class housewife in California who simply cracks up under the strain and pressures of life. When you consider the relentlessly hysterical behaviour of her husband, his friends, his mother, her mother and their children, it's a wonder she kept a grip on her marbles as long as she did. Cassavetes' wife, Gina Rowlands, plays the harassed lady, and her performance won her an Oscar nomination for Best Actress this year. I can understand why she was nominated, and I can also understand why she didn't win. Despite the director's semi-documentary approach, you're always aware that you're watching actors doing a bit of acting, and sometimes overacting. By contrast, when Ken Loach tackled the subject of mental illness in family life a few years ago, the performances were so restrained and realistic that it was like intruding into a genuine family's private grief. In A Woman Under the Influence, everyone communicates with everyone else at the top of his voice, and the more they all shout, the less convincing their protestations of love and confidence sound. Peter Falk plays the bemused and noisy husband in the distracted manner of a blue-collar Columbo, who knows there's just one more question he ought to ask, but can't remember what it is. John Cassavetes' direction has style but no polish, which is quite appropriate for this particular subject, and generally speaking, it's an interesting and worthwhile film which could benefit from a little trimming here and there. I think now, though, that we might have a look at Miss Rowland's near-Oscar-winning performance. Mr. Falk has brought a load of his workmates home for a morning meal. Afterwards, husband and wife are alone at the table, and this early in the film, it's obvious that Miss Rowland's is breaking up.
Yeah. Right.
I was trying to be nice.
Wacko!
I like your friends.
I know it.
I'm a warm person.
I know that.
I'm not one of those stiffs that you like with their noses up in the air. And boom, boom, with their noses up in the air. I'm not going to treat those guys. I want them to feel... I love those guys. I love them. I love anybody you bring in a house, Nick.
I know that.
I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to feel... They don't sit there like a bunch of... I want to...
What the hell are you talking about? You didn't do anything wrong. It was just the way he was looking.
Down, Milo. Down.
Billy was looking at you this way. He don't know you don't do any harm. It's the way the guy looked at you. Ain't the guy looking at you like this? He don't know what to do. This monkey don't know what to do. He thinks you mean something. He don't know you don't mean it. I don't mind you being a lunatic. Not lunatic.
I didn't do anything wrong.
A Woman Under the Influence opened in the West End yesterday after closing the London Film Festival last Sunday. Coincidentally, another film festival, which is gaining a respectable international reputation, has also just ended. This was the 4th Tehran Festival, which was opened by the Empress of Iran and showed in competition 17 films from 11 countries. Rex Harrison was on the jury. And apart from the competition, there was a retrospective of the work of François Truffaut and a review of Latin American movies with 20 pictures from Brazil, Mexico, Argentina and various other such countries. In addition, there was a festival of festivals, which included Conversation Piece, the latest film by the Italian director Luchino Visconti, he who made Death in Venice. Conversation Piece, which previously had only been seen at the New York Festival, stars Burt Lancaster as a wealthy but unworldly man of learning, whose apartment in Rome is invaded by a family of rich Sybarites who bully him into letting them rent his empty rooms. In this scene, Burt Lancaster gives a dinner party for the young girl in her group and the friends who've taken over the floor above him.
You're so gloomy. You didn't want to have us here, did you? You had to force you into it.
No, I did not.
No, it was my own idea.
Well, then why don't you say something to us?
Oh, don't listen to him. We're all sort of down. Not our fault, though. There's a new tragedy here every 5 minutes.
It's the same everywhere. I hadn't been home for lunch in a long while, so I went today. Big mistake. My father's workers have been on strike for a week. He and my brother are still not talking. And Dad just sat there, silent, at the head of the table. Like you, Professor. But you don't have any workers striking, or a son posing as a Marxist. You have the figures in your paintings. You're surrounded by calm, serene people, without any problems. Do you like them all?
Oh, I have my preferences and my infidelities. For a long while, I favored the Sitwell family. I went so far as to bring them into my bedroom, but that relationship proved to be incompatible. I found myself quarreling with the oldest daughter, the tall one over there.
And who are you going to quarrel with in this new family?
What family? This one? Soon I'll be quarreling with all of you. In fact, I already have.
That's all over, though, because here we are.
Well, Conversation Piece should be seen in London early next year. Britain's official entry at Tehran was The Man Who Would Be King, directed by John Huston and starring Sean Connery and Michael Caine. And in next week's programme, we'll have a report on the making of that film on location in Morocco. Good evening. The Man Who Would Be King has its premiere, a royal premiere no less, in the presence of Her Royal Highness Mrs. Phillips on Thursday. And tonight we have a report on the making of that film in Morocco. I'll also be reviewing Dog Day Afternoon, starring Al Pacino in the story of a bank robbery that went very badly wrong, and of course the voracious Jaws, which opens on Boxing Day, and thank goodness for that, because I'm getting tired of mentioning it. What's more, we have news of films for children over the holidays, and naturally a nice festive round-off to the whole programme. So let's get briskly underway with Dog Day Afternoon, directed by Sidney Lumet and based on a remarkable bank robbery that took place in Brooklyn 3 years ago. What was remarkable about it was that as a bank robbery it never got off the ground. In the first place there was hardly any money in the bank, and in the second place the police were on the scene surrounding the building almost before the robbers had the safe open. In the film, Al Pacino plays the leader of the gang and John Cazale his murderously inclined sidekick. Here they are now in the very early stages of the robbery.
They're coming in the back! In the bog! Come on! Back! Get them. No, don't, sir! Get there, Johnny! Get in there! Go in! Get in there! Who fired that shot? All right. Who fired the shot? No? Okay, legs. What's that? Hey, Sonny. Come on out, Sonny. Sonny! 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 Well, take care of that, will you? Sonny, come on out! Go straight that out, will you, Carmine? Sonny! Sonny, come on out. Sonny? Sonny! Sonny! You son of a boy! Get those people killed! Come on out, Sonny. Sonny, come on out. Come on out here now. Sonny?
The other remarkable aspect of this disastrous raid was that it was planned by the Al Pacino character to finance a sex change operation for his homosexual wife, his male wife, I mean, and not his ordinary conventional female-type wife, although he did have one of those too. You see what they mean when they say truth is stranger than fiction. If this story hadn't been true, nobody would have dared to invent it, nor perhaps would they have dared to invent the curious affection that grows up between the robbers and the bank employees whom they hold hostage against the police, or indeed the relationship between Pacino and the huge crowd that gathers in the street to watch the exchanges between robbers and cops and cheers Pacino on, until the revelation that he's a homosexual, whereupon everyone turns against him. Well, not everyone, because Gay Lib adds to the confusion by holding a demo in his support and chanting out of the closet and into the streets. Add to all this mind-boggling stuff the fact that pretty well the entire operation was watched on a national television network, and you begin to feel that Americans are very strange people indeed, and not a bit like us really, despite the fact that they almost speak our language. The centre of the film, of course, is Al Pacino, who gives a riveting performance in a subtle and highly effective study of paranoia. He's alternately cocky and unsure of himself, sympathetic and alienating. Alienating because, after all, men who rob banks to subsidise their boyfriend's sex change operation aren't too much like the fellow next door. Or at least I hope they're not too much like the fellow next door. Dog Day Afternoon is by no means a flawless picture. It's rather too long, it sags a bit in the middle, and Frank Pearson's dialogue, which is splendidly crisp and colourful in the beginning, becomes somewhat perfunctory by the end. But it's skillfully directed by Sidney Lumet, and as a portrait both of a criminal type and of the way a city like New York can take violence in its stride as just another unavoidable facet of everyday life, it's well worth seeing. Now let's have a look at Pacino goading the police and encouraging the crowd.
You're a city cop, right? Robbing a bank's a federal offense. They got me on kidnapping, armed robbery. They're gonna bury me, man. I don't want to talk to somebody who's trying to calm me. Get somebody in charge here.
I am in charge.
I don't want to talk to some flunky pig trying to calm me, man.
You don't have to be calling.
What's he doing?
What do you get back
What
over
are you
there?
moving in there for?
Will you
What's he-
get back there?
Huh?
Get back there,
What's
will
he
you?
doing? Look at him with him.
Get over there.
Go on back there, man.
Get over there, will you?
He wants to kill me so bad he can taste it.
I'm always going to kill you.
Attica! Attica!
Will you?
Attica! 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 Attica!
Incidentally, the Pacino character did manage to finance his boyfriend's operation, not from the proceeds of the bank robbery, but, would you believe, from the sale of the film rights. Anyway, on now to what is possibly the most eagerly awaited and quite certainly the most ballyhooed film of the year, Der Weiße Hai, as they call it in Germany. What do you mean you never heard of it? Well, perhaps the French title is more familiar, Les Dents de la Mer. No good? Well, how about Dodensgap? Come on, you must have heard of Dodensgap. Everyone in Denmark has heard of Dodensgap. All right, then perhaps you know it better under its Japanese title, Jaws. You've heard of Jaws, surely, the one about the big white shark that terrorizes an East Coast beach resort in America and has already made more money than any other film in the history of the world. Well, it opens in London on Boxing Day, and all that really needs to be said is that it's pretty nearly as good as the advance publicity. Those of you who've read Peter Benchley's novel will no doubt be relieved to learn that the absurd and steamy Peyton Place-type love affair, which runs parallel with the story of the shark, has been ruthlessly and properly excised from the film, so that we're left with the fish, its effect on the town it terrorizes, and the hunt, led by Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, and Roy Scheider. The direction by Steven Spielberg is admirably taut. The tension, aided by some excellent music, is remarkably sustained, especially as the shark itself isn't seen for the first 57 minutes, and the performances, despite a tendency to overdo it a bit by Mr. Shaw, are excellent. Admittedly, I don't quite understand, and in fact I don't think the makers do either, why Jaws should be the most successful film ever, but as a first-class piece of commercial entertainment, it's going to be pretty hard to beat. Yet, having said all that, I now have to disappoint you, because although we showed scenes from the film last week, the makers of Jaws are treating the shark itself with as much reverence as if it walked on the water, and won't provide any clips in which it appears in all its menacing glory. Well, sucks to them. Instead, I'm going to show you a much bigger fish than their rotten old shark, Moby Dick himself, no less. John Huston's film, starring Gregory Peck and Orson Welles, although, of course, Mr. Welles doesn't play the title role, despite being admirably built for it these days, is being revived on Thursday at the Everyman Hampstead. On the whole, it was rather disappointing, but the whale scenes are still pretty remarkable.
You should not have come back, ye grinning whale. We'll cut your mouth and eat your grin with.
John Huston made Moby Dick in 1956, and with the exception of Fat City and perhaps Night of the Iguana, he's not had too many solid hits since then. So I dare say it's rather important for him that the man who would be king should go down well. This, of course, is based on Kipling's marvellous short story about the two down-and-out Englishmen in India at the end of last century who set out to make themselves kings of the remote and wild land of Kafiristan. The stars are Sean Connery and Michael Caine, and the film gets off to an encouraging start with a royal premiere attended by Princess Anne on Thursday. I'll be reviewing it at some later date, but for now, here's the report which Film 75 made on location with Huston and his stars in Morocco earlier this year.
How was it, Eric? Not very good. How was it for you?
Not absolutely perfect all the way through.
Once more, please.
John Huston filmed The Man Who Would Be King in Morocco. It's based on Rudyard Kipling's story of two British adventurers who take over a country. Sean Connery is the man who actually becomes king.
This looks kind of strange that if they get in and then they turn around to shoot, we come in and we leave them, the camera goes with us, and it looks as though we might be shooting them.
His ally and co-conspirator is Michael Caine.
Well, let's do the same thing as come back up through them again.
Yeah.
What's that?
Do you want us to come back up through them again?
I think so, because on the other one we left you to send. Everyone got by and you were the last two. So you're not...
But what attracted the actors to the picture?
First and foremost, to work with Huston. I wanted to work with Huston. I've always been a great admirer of his. Also, of course, the part is marvellous. It's a fabulous part to play. And it's the type of film I wanted to be in. And I think it's the type of film we basically should be making, instead of kind of competing with Kojak or something, which people can see for nothing. You know, you've got to make, this is what I call a movie.
I mean, I think it's a superb script from many levels. It's very pleasurable dialogue and satisfying to people who like words, and there's humor, and there's the scale, size, you know, a couple thousand armies, and there's action, and in many different locations throughout this country in particular. No good then.
Well, the mules don't go over the side. If that's what we're trying to do, nothing happened with the mules. Not a goddamn thing happens with the mules.
James, you put them in a spot, I can get them in a tangle quicker than anybody. Any horse.
Because they were all on the flat.
I'll mess it up for you.
Kind of high.
John Huston had been planning this film for a very long time. His original idea was to have Clark Gable and Humphrey Bogart in the starring roles, but Bogart's death in 1957 brought the project to a temporary halt.
If they're that far back, there are not all these many people right up here, you see.
Nearly 20 years later, Huston at last found the stars to replace Bogey and Gable.
In this picture, there's a minimum direction. Sean Connery and Michael Caine. They are the roles.
The two parts are, I think, almost one person, actually.
There is a tremendous relationship in the movie between Dravot, which is Sean Connery, and Carnahan, which is myself.
See, when you read the short story, the thing that comes across, it's only 22 pages. What comes across is they've interchanged, lifted, I think 50% of the dialogue is Kipling. Very difficult stuff to learn. Phraseology is quite different from, you know, modern metaphors. And Michael can take, he has parts that, in the short story of the dialogue, that Dravot has in the film. And yet it's still workable.
It's a film that only really works on the screen, and there's no point in doing it for television, and there's no money to do it for television. It has to work on a big screen, and you have to go and see it on a big screen.
The Man Who Would Be King is a big film in the sense that it has a large cast, it's full of action, and it has spectacular locations. Kipling's story was set in northern India, but the filming was done in Morocco because it was more convenient, and anyway, the landscape looked right. The biggest set was built in the Moroccan hills, an entire city in an odd architectural style that mixed the primitive East with the classical Greek. It represents the Asian capital, which, according to legend, was established by Alexander the Great. Producer John Foreman explains.
Several months ago, before we started, I read in the New York Times that a French crew of archaeologists had indeed discovered the legendary city of Alexander the Great in Afghanistan, which is, of course, the city referred to by Kipling in his story, The Man Who Would Be King, that it actually existed. Now, I've never seen photographs of what it is they found, but it is a known fact that Alexander conquered all the way to Afghanistan before returning back to Greece. It was this information that caused, and the fact that Alexander was a Mason, that caused Kipling to write the story.
Incidentally, it was Foreman who eventually persuaded John Huston to make the picture.
He saw this quite impressive body of work and said, for God's sake, let's try once more.
Right, let's get everybody ready on this. We'll have a go.
Well, The Man Who Would Be King opens to the public on Friday. Well, now, this is the time of year, or one of the times of year, when people with children to amuse grab the entertainment guides in the newspapers and discover that every movie in town has an X certificate and is called either Nancy with her knickers down or I Married a Teenage Sadomasochist. In other words, the common complaint is that children's films are in decidedly short supply, unless your children are so advanced and precocious as to be in urgent need of psychiatric help. It is therefore worth pointing out that this Christmas there are quite a few special films for children to be seen around town. At the National Film Theatre, for instance, there's a private screening on December the 30th of 2 new pictures made by the Children's Film Foundation. One of these is Robin Hood Jr., which recounts the exploits of a young Saxon boy and his fight against a dastardly Norman baron.
I won't do it. I'm not afraid of your threats.
You will do as I tell you, or rot in my dungeons till doomsday.
We will be rescued.
The way you rescued your brother.
We will be rescued by Robin Hood.
Robin Hood? The outlaw of Sherwood Forest. What know you of him?
Forgive me. Oh. I know he will rescue us and burn this castle to the ground.
Not Robin Hood, nor the devil himself will burn my castle to the ground.
My lord, look!
Fire! Fire! Fire!
Seize the boy! Seize him, you fool!
Seize him! Where's that water? 3 buckets over here! 4 buckets! Start on the fire! Hurry, you idle dog!
I don't know why the Normans always get cast as the heavies. It seems a bit thick, if you ask me. Anyway, as I said, the initial showing of Robin Hood Jr. is for an invited audience only, but it will be available to the rest of us in the new year. Meanwhile, the Phoenix Theatre in Charing Cross Road is holding a children's film festival which continues until mid-January and which introduces 2 new Russian versions of comfortable old classics, Treasure Island and Robinson Crusoe. Neither of these has been shown in this country before, and so to give you some idea of their style, here's an extract from each of them.
Cutlasses! At them with cutlasses!
Back to cover! Blast!
Poor Robinson Crusoe. Incidentally, that children's festival at the Phoenix Theatre also includes a bunch of short Russian films, among them cartoons like these.
Catch her! You can gallop all you want, Captain, and antelope of yours. In the meantime, I'll pick up these. 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, I know this is beginning to sound a bit like Soviet propaganda, but some more Russian children's films will be showing each morning at London's Gate Cinema from the 20th of December to the 4th of January. One is Wild Swans, an hour-long cartoon from the tale by Hans Christian Andersen, and the other is also an hour-long, and it's a feature about a huge elephant called Black Mountain, and it was filmed, of course, in India. Well, that brings us pretty nearly to the end of this programme, and indeed to the end of Film 75. Not quite to the end, though, because on Sunday, December the 28th, I'll be back with a special extended programme, which consists of my selection of the best films, or anyway, the films that I liked best, in 1975. But before we move on to that, and before we return in the new year, wondrously transformed in Film 76, A Salute to Christmas. The film showing with Dog Day Afternoon during its West End run is a 12-minute short called The Christmas Tree.
A very appropriate title too. And here now is the star, Julian Chagran, as the tree itself. And on that eccentric but seasonal note, we really do come to the end. So as I leave you with Gilbert O'Sullivan and a film made in the 1930s to get you into the proper festive spirit, the only thing left for me to say is good night and have a very good Christmas.
Scusi, signor. Can I take your coat?
Thank you very much.
Your gloves?
Of course.
Your hat? Grazie, signor.
Prego.
Good evening. As you probably gathered, that was Peter Sellers in his familiar guise as the inept Inspector Clouseau in The Return of the Pink Panther. And the Panther himself is seen here with a friend at a recent junket at Gstaad in Switzerland, where much of the film was shot and where it was unveiled to the more or less eager press of Europe. More of all that nonsense in a little while. What we also have in tonight's programme are reviews of Rancho Deluxe, a tale of rustlers in contemporary America, starring Jeff Bridges and Sam Waterston, and a Swiss film called Confrontation, or Confrontation, or if you prefer, Assassination in Davos, which is about the killing of a Nazi official in 1936. Furthermore, we'll be talking to the director, Herbert Ross, about The Sunshine Boys, which opens in London next week and stars Walter Matthau and George Burns. But let's begin with Rancho Deluxe, a somewhat rambling tale in which Jeff Bridges and Sam Waterston appear as a couple of rustlers in modern-day America. Here they are, doing a spot of rustling.
I'll do it. My leader. You can practice walking the coin. So you got to where you're real proud of it. Where's the song?
In the bed. I brought the little McCullough.
The thing is so damn hard to start.
You are nervous. Shall I show you a few card tricks?
Just show me that thing start.
Did you gas this mother up?
Smell it, Cecil. You flooded it.
Then we got to wait it out.
Oh, just be a couple of sleepy rustlers waiting for somebody to come up here and mend fence.
What emerges as we follow the antisocial and frequently sexual adventures of these two heroes is a parable about contemporary America. Bridges is a dropout from the affluent middle classes, and Waterston is a North American Indian. And the plot concerns their increasingly ambitious raids on the herds of cattle belonging to a wealthy rancher, played by Clifton James, and Mr. James's attempts to stop them with the aid of Slim Pickens as a decrepit horse thief turned detective. Before we go any further, I have to say that it's quite a funny film, and I dare say it would be even funnier if I'd been able to understand even half of what the characters were saying. But alas, as in so many films these days, being able to understand the dialogue is a luxury which the audience is sternly forbidden. Still, reading between the lines, as it were, what Rancho Deluxe is really about is the plight of America today, the greed and acquisitiveness, the gap between the haves and have-nots, and even the gap between the generations, which you may have heard about in other films. I'm not a monster, says Mr. James in a moment of frustration. I'm a property owner, thus making it clear that in America, and very possibly everywhere else, the gap between the two has to be clearly defined, otherwise it's not always discernible. An interesting and enjoyable picture on the whole, neatly played and directed by Frank Perry in a mixture of styles, ranging from the dramatic to the comic strip. Let's have an example of the latter. Clifton James, his wife Elizabeth Ashley, a couple of ranch hands, and Slim Pickens and his niece Charlene Dallas sitting down to lunch in the old homestead.
Laura, what do you do with yourself when you're not lending your Uncle Henry a helping hand?
I help my mom. What about when you're not helping her? Oh, and I go over to the senior citizens and help all the old folks. Livingston? No, ma'am, in Choto. What else do you do? I sew. What do you sew? I just like to make nice things for nice folks.
You are a remarkable girl, Laura.
All I want is for folks to be happy. It's a big, wide, wonderful
Damn it,
world.
Laura, we're trying to eat. Holy Christ almighty.